In controlled experiments across the last 50 years, when people feel their freedom is restricted, they're statistically more likely to do the very thing they're told not to do. Psychologists call it reactance. It's measurable, predictable, and surprisingly powerful. Now pair that with a bold biblical claim. Scripture says Jesus will reign for 1,000 years, perfect justice, global peace. Yet after all that, nations will still rebel. How is that even possible? Why do humans push back even against righteous rule? Today we're fusing cognitive science, political history, archaeology, and close biblical reading to expose the hidden mechanics of that final revolt hinted at in Revelation 20. In the next 18 minutes, I'll walk you through 7 data points, reveal 5 often overlooked passages about rebellion in the Millennial Kingdom, connect them to modern psychology and political science, and uncover a manuscript mystery about Gog and Magog you've probably never heard. Stay with me for the jaw-dropping link that changes how you see the human heart under perfect governance, and a bonus revelation at the end. Let's start with credibility. In 1966, social psychologist Jack Bream proposed psychological reactance theory. When our sense of autonomy is threatened, a motivational state kicks in to restore it. That drive can tilt us toward defiance, even when the rule is good for us. Fast forward. A 2013 meta-analysis by Stephen Rains pooled studies across health, politics, and persuasion and confirmed robust reactance effects. In other words, controlling messages predict anger, negative thoughts, and oppositional behavior. In 2006, Steve Riker and Alex Haslam's BBC prison study reframed how resistance works. It's not just bad apples. Group identity and perceived legitimacy drive whether people comply or push back. And in 2003, political scientists James Fearon and David Layton demonstrated that insurgency risk can persist even under strong states. It isn't only about grievance. It's about opportunity structures, coordination, terrain, and perceived costs. Translation: even capable, ostensibly just regimes face rebellion under the right conditions. Now turn the page to biblical scholarship. The Greek of Revelation borrows a charged phrase from the Septuagint, to shepherd with an iron staff. Revelation 19 echoes Psalm 2, you will shepherd them with a rod of iron. The Hebrew word for rod, shebet, is not just a weapon, it's a staff of authority and guidance. And in Greek, poimaino means to shepherd, not simply to smash. That nuance matters. It's firm, protective governance. The Dead Sea Scrolls, particularly the Great Isaiah Scroll, confirm the stability of Isaiah's text, including Isaiah 65:20, a puzzling verse that pictures an age of blessing with radical longevity, and yet acknowledges that the sinner still exists and can be accursed. Second Temple texts like Psalms of Solomon 17 imagined a messianic king purging injustice and ruling the nations, but they didn't claim hearts would be transformed by force. Early church voices wrestled with these tensions too. Irenaeus took the 1,000 years quite literally, while Origen and Augustine leaned symbolic, yet all agreed on a climactic exposure of hearts before the final judgment. We'll expose evidence from psychology, political science, archaeology, and manuscript studies. A secret thread in Zechariah, what that iron staff really says in Greek and Hebrew. Key archaeological case studies of rebellion under overwhelming power, and several intertextual connections many readers miss. Let's lay the scientific foundation. In the 1960s, researchers noticed a paradox. The more a message said don't, the more people did. Brehm named this reactance. Decades later, Rain's meta-analysis confirmed that when people perceive language as controlling, reactance spikes. The data consistently show that 2 mediators, anger and negative cognitions, predict noncompliance. In other words, say, do this or else, and you nudge the brain toward, no, I won't. Meanwhile, social identity research found that resistance isn't just personal stubbornness, it's social. If people see the authority as outgroup or illegitimate, compliance drops, even if the outcomes are beneficial. That's exactly what Riker and Haslam observed. Group identity plus perceived fairness drives acceptance or pushback. Now scale up to nations. Fearon and Layton modeled the conditions that allow rebellion to ignite: opportunity, coordination, low perceived costs, and favorable environments. Even strong states never reach zero risk. What does this mean for our topic? Benevolent top-down systems can secure order. They can't guarantee love. Public health campaigns, education, and even content moderation show the same curve. Mandates reduce chaos but don't rewrite desire. You can inhibit harm without converting the heart. The biblical claim that some will still resist under the Messiah's perfect reign aligns with observed human dynamics. External peace does not automatically rewire the will. Of course, this is debated. Some have challenged the generalizability of classic lab studies like the Stanford prison experiment. Yet updated designs and replications continue to find that legitimacy and autonomy are key variables in obedience and resistance. Political science debates the exact causal pathways, but the consensus holds. Dynamic interactions of identity, opportunity, and perceived legitimacy predict rebellion better than grievance alone. Here's the big reveal. Ancient scripture described this millennia ago, down to the pattern of outward submission masking inward resistance. Our anchor text is Revelation 20, 1,000-year reign, Satan-bound, global peace, and then a shocking twist. After Satan is released for a short time, Gog and Magog gather the nations against the beloved city. Many readers treat this as a brief epilogue, but it's actually a culmination of a thread woven throughout the prophets. Nations compelled into order, yet not all hearts renewed. Consider the language. Rule with a rod of iron in Psalm 2 and Revelation 19. The Hebrew shebet is a staff, a symbol of tribal leadership and shepherding. The Greek in Revelation uses poimaino, to shepherd. This isn't merely pulverizing force. It's firm, just governance that protects the flock and confronts predators. Then notice Revelation 20's wording. Satan must be released for a short time. That little word must, the Greek dei, signals purpose. The release is not random chaos. It's a divinely permitted exposure of hidden loyalties. And then Isaiah 65:20. In a transformed age of blessing, the sinner 100 years old is still accursed. Longevity rises. Sin hasn't vanished for everyone. Now weave in the cross references. Zechariah 14 envisions nations streaming to Jerusalem to celebrate the Feast of Booths. Those who refuse, it says, receive no rain. Built into the vision of messianic rule is the possibility of noncompliance and a firm, just response. Psalm 66 says, "Your enemies submit to you," but the Hebrew verb can mean feign obedience. Outward conformity can cloak inner resistance. Isaiah 2 and 11 show peace and justice flooding the earth from the Messiah's rule. Yet these describe structural outcomes of the king's administration, swords into plowshares, distinct from universal, instantaneous regeneration of every heart. And Revelation 2 adds that faithful believers will share in shepherding with an iron staff, extending Jesus' just governance. The theme is consistent: a righteous king, a righteous order, and still a final unveiling of what people truly love. Place this in historical context. Second Temple hopes in texts like Psalms of Solomon 17 dreamed of a son of David who would purge injustice and gather a holy people. Qumran's community anticipated cosmic order restored but still guarded against internal corruption, which tells you even visions of ideal order accounted for human frailty. The early church wrestled with the millennium from the beginning. Irenaeus presented a rich, earthy view of the 1,000 years, while Augustine reframed it symbolically. But both affirmed a final sifting, a last exposure of hearts before the new creation. Across views, one theme persists: perfect rule reveals rather than coerces love. Let's go deeper with 4 angles often missed. First, the numerical pattern. 1,000 years appears 6 times in a handful of verses in Revelation 20. That's unusual repetition for John. In apocalyptic literature, repetition is a highlighter. It marks a bounded, purposeful epic. Call it a lab phase where evil is restrained, then briefly released to show what's inside the human will. Whether you read the 1,000 years literally or as a symbol of completeness, the structure signals 2 phases: restraint, then exposure. Second comma, prophetic dual horizons. Zechariah's global Feast of Booths echoes ancient Israel's pilgrimage and projects it onto the nations. There's a near fulfillment in post-exilic worship and a far fulfillment under messianic rule. Isaiah's wolf and lamb piece paints Eden restored, yet Isaiah 65:20 preserves the moral tension, blessing without erasing agency. Revelation stitches these threads into a timeline. Peace established, hearts tried, final judgment. Third comma, consider intertestamental insight. While not canonical, texts like 1 Enoch, Wisdom of Solomon, and Psalms of Solomon illuminate the atmosphere of Jewish hope. They consistently picture the righteous vindicated and injustice purged, but they never claim that coercion can regenerate the heart. Early Christians cited these works as illustrative, not authoritative, to show that even robust expectations for a messianic king didn't erase the problem of inner transformation. Fourth, archaeology's sobering lessons. Masada tells the story of zealous revolt against Rome's overwhelming military superiority. It doesn't prove prophecy, but it shows a timeless constant. People will die for defiance when identity and perceived justice collide. The Lachish reliefs in the British Museum depict Judah's resistance to Assyria's iron machine, another snapshot of rebellion against seemingly unassailable power. History is littered with the same pattern. Even when rebellion seems irrational, humans choose it to reclaim agency or honor. What about the text-critical details? Revelation's phrase, Gog and Magog, is stable across major ancient manuscripts. John seems to universalize Ezekiel's Gog of the land of Magog into a global cipher, a way to say all the archetypes of opposition converge. And the great Isaiah scroll's stability on Isaiah 65 means the tension, astonishing blessing alongside the existence of sin, reflects a very old, very deliberate thread in Scripture. The manuscripts support the theology, they don't undercut it. Let's address the strongest objections honestly. First, this is coincidence or confirmation bias. The convergence we're seeing is not a single line cherry-picked to match a conclusion. Independent disciplines are lining up. Psychology quantifies reactance across contexts. Political science models rebellion's stubborn persistence even under strong states. Multiple biblical books across centuries announce a righteous order with persistent pockets of unwilling hearts, and stable manuscript witnesses preserve the tension. The pattern coherence argues for substance, not just storytelling. Second, there are alternative interpretations. Absolutely. The amillennial reading treats Revelation 20 as symbolic of the church age, with the release describing an end-stage crisis. Its strength is literary sensitivity to apocalyptic imagery and a long theological tradition from Augustine to modern scholars. Its limitation is how to handle concrete features in Zechariah 14 and Isaiah 65:20. The premillennial view reads a literal earthly reign followed by a final revolt. Its strength is its straightforward reading of Revelation 20 and Zechariah's international pilgrimage. Its challenge is explaining how glorified saints and mortal sinners coexist. The postmillennial view pictures a gospel-driven era of peace before Christ's return, with Gog and Magog as a brief apostasy. Its strength is mission optimism. Its challenge is reinterpreting texts that retain sanctions and sinner language. But here's the key. All three views still converge on a climactic exposure of hearts before the end. That human dynamic, external order with inner testing, remains coherent across systems. Third, science changes. Why anchor theology to it? We're not using science to prove doctrine. We're noting alignment with stable, replicated principles. Autonomy matters, legitimacy matters, identity matters. As methods evolve, the core finding has held for decades. Control without interchange breeds pushback, and there's fresh evidence. New studies published since 2022 continue to show that controlling language increases reactance, while invitational narrative framing reduces it. On the textual side, recent editorial work on Revelation reaffirms the stability of Gog and Magog across early witnesses. The trajectory is consistent. Both behavioral science and textual scholarship strengthen, not weaken, the underlying case. So what's the deeper meaning? God's kingdom brings justice, healing, and peace. Yet Scripture insists, transformation is not mechanical. Even under Jesus' perfect governance, love can't be coerced. The brief release of Satan is not a failure of the kingdom. It's a revelation of the heart. The final revolt unveils what outward order can conceal. God's character shines through the tension. He is just, establishing righteous structures, and He is patient, revealing hearts before ushering in the new creation where sin is no more. Practically, this calls us to read carefully. When you study Revelation 20, Psalm 2, Zechariah 14, and Isaiah 65, Pay attention to the original language and the intertextual echoes. Notice that rod of iron also means a shepherd's staff, firm, not brutal, decisive, not arbitrary. Compare the Masoretic text, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the Septuagint where you can, and use interlinear tools to see what translations can miss. Let science be a conversation partner, not a master. In your own leadership and discipleship, expect human pushback when you lean on control instead of invitation. Long-term change is born from inner renewal, not mere external compliance. Here's the spiritual challenge. Ask yourself, do I obey Jesus because I must, or because I love him? Where am I outwardly compliant but inwardly resistant? Pray with the psalmist, "Search me, O God, and know my heart." Invite the Spirit to align your desires with your obedience, so that when tested, what's revealed is faithfulness born of love, not just fear of consequence. We should also hold a balanced posture. There are open questions. How exactly will the administration of the Millennial Kingdom function? What's the relationship between resurrected saints and mortal populations? How should we understand prophetic feasts in a future age? We can be confident in Scripture's big contours and humble about the details. Keep studying, keep testing ideas in community, and keep welcoming solid scholarship into your faith. Let's land the plane with a quick recap. Science shows reactance is real and measurable. Political research demonstrates that rebellion can persist even under strong, capable regimes. Scripture presents a righteous reign and yet anticipates noncompliance and residual sin in texts like Zechariah 14 and Isaiah 65:20, culminating in Revelation 20's final revolt. The original language reframes rod of iron as firm shepherding rather than mere brutality. Manuscripts from the Dead Sea Scrolls to early Revelation witnesses stabilize the tension instead of erasing it. And history's archaeological record showcases the human willingness to defy overwhelming power. The central insight is this: perfect governance exposes the heart. Only the new creation transforms it. And here's one more thing. A quiet verse in Psalm 66 says, "Your enemies feign obedience to you." That line bridges the testaments. It sketches the psychology of outward order and inward resistance that Revelation 20 brings to its dramatic finale. The Bible's psychological realism runs deeper than we often realize. If this opened your eyes, I'd love to hear how it changes the way you read Revelation 20. Which evidence hit hardest for you, the psychology, the prophets, or the manuscripts? If you found this valuable, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more deep dives where Scripture meets science. Share this with someone who loves tough questions. Watch our next video. Stay curious, stay humble, and keep seeking truth with both mind and heart.